Hello. I miss you all very much. I wish I could be there this September in yoga teacher training. This environment nourishes me and my spirit and all the people in my family that I get to meet and the things that I get to do. I'm currently at a garden center in a old cooler doing my presentation. My presentation today is on the teres major muscle for the shoulder and philosophy. So I'll start with my shoulder muscle. My shoulder muscle is the teres major, and its origin, where it starts, is on the inferior border of the scapula, so this triangle bone back here. It starts on the scapula, and it's on the surface that's on the back of our body, on the shoulder blade, and then it comes out of that shoulder blade and it attaches on the inside of the humerus. So it kind of runs in this fashion here. And the teres major, if if it would get really tight or create dysfunction, it would cause shoulder pain, and stretching that muscle could relieve shoulder pain or something that looked like impingement. Sometimes this posture where we hold everything up and forward can lift up the shoulder blade, which lifts up the origin and shortens the muscle. And just by guiding ourselves and our students to bring our shoulders down is a way to bring that origin and insertion further apart so that they're in a better biomechanical advantage. Internal rotation is the primary action of the teres major. Internal rotation is if we all take our arms up and then point our fingers down, our thumbs, that's internal rotation. So going into Gomukhasana arms is also internal rotation. This is a yoga pose that would use the teres major. Also in our inversions, it would use the teres major. A way to stretch this muscle is stretching a muscle. You want to take where it starts, so the origin, and the insertion, and make space and make the muscle longer versus making it shorter and contracting. So if you take your any arm up and then let your elbow fold over your head, this would be, the bottom of the shoulder blade is the origin, and then the insertion being in the humerus on the inside, and then pulling the arm over and side bending is a really, really nice way to stretch the teres major. And also, if you wanted to do what would be called a trigger point release or a static stretch, you could take a ball or a foam roller and place, I have an apple because I'm in a produce market right now, and place that at the base, kind of that lower part of the triangle bone there, the scapula, placing it there and then laying on that muscle, rolling out on a foam roller or rolling the muscle. Ooh, you could even look for a little bit of a tender spot. If that's tender, it might really benefit your shoulder to stretch that out. The other motions that the teres major does is adduction. So when we add our arms to the body, the teres major helps, and extension of the humerus. So back behind us is extension. And that is my shoulder muscle. Another way to stretch it would be child's pose. That's a nice way to stretch a lot of our shoulder muscles. So now I'm going to be moving on to philosophy. Thank you for this opportunity. I do find that being in yoga teacher training and actively participating, I get inspired to hear not only your presentations, but I read more things and I'm exposed to more things that inspire me, and I appreciate that. I am mapping fear and philosophy today. So I'll go a little bit later into my relationship with fear and why I chose this particular topic. I ended up looking up philosophy and philosophers and Socrates, and Socrates' method, or Socrates like questions, being a philosopher, he used contemplative questions. So, meaning that the question was asked, but the answer was not provided. And when I started thinking about it, a lot of the great teachers use contemplative questions. Jesus uses contemplative questions. Even some of our teachers, our yoga teachers, my mentors, they also use questions. So thinking about even when we're teaching our children or our family, like the thought of just asking a contemplation question and not having an outcome or a desire, or maybe just pushing my viewpoint on somebody, that was really powerful for me to think about how do I want to think, and to have a creative thought process around something instead of a view pushed on you or me. So I'm hoping that a handout is going to head your way today with a little help of a friend. And my contemplation question is, and if you have time in class today to stop for 1 minute and write on the back of your paper maybe what your answer is, the question is fear real? Is fear real? So I have 4 philosophers that I picked out on what their views were when I looked up fear and philosophy in certain people. I'd like to share those quickly. A Greek philosopher, Aristotle, defines fear as a disturbance or a pain caused by the mental image of a future evil or a destructive event. And Aristotle studied what was called first philosophy at the time, or metaphysics. I really, really enjoy metaphysics and reading about metaphysics. A Game of Life by Florence Scovel Shinn in the early 1900s is a really good resource for metaphysics, and thinking that how powerful our thoughts are and how powerful our words are. Next is Greek Stoic philosopher Epictetus. Epictetus advised focusing only on what one can control, as fear often arises from external events outside our power. Fear itself is the only thing to avoid. Next, German philosopher Nietzsche, I might be butchering these, I apologize, viewed fear as a result of powerlessness and a reluctance to confront the unknown, seeing it as an obstacle to personal growth. He proposed challenging one's perceptions of fear and embracing the will to power to overcome challenges and assert oneself. And he is known for the phrase, God is dead, which was controversial, if you'd like to read up on that, about what it says versus maybe what his intention was about this statement. Norwegian philosopher Lars Svensson examined fear's broader social consequences, arguing that it undermines trust and it requires a shift towards a culture of hope to balance the overwhelming amount of information designed to inspire fear in contemporary society. So those are just a few viewpoints that are out there about fear. And then I would like to take a few minutes and share my personal journey or relationship with fear. And mine it's a life of navigating different things that we get to navigate while we're here doing all the things, and the spiritual journey that I have been on recently. So I'll start with the retreat center that I'm going to and working at now, current day. I've been going to this yoga retreat center. It's Gray Bear Retreat Center in Hohenwald, Tennessee. It's in the West Hills of Tennessee, for maybe 15 years. I just take a weekend and go to a rest and relaxation. And I remember going to my first retreat. I frequented in this place because it was my mother's half sibling who took the family home and turned it into a yoga retreat center, and it sits on 400 acres of this beautiful rustic environment. And it's a place where, you know, I pull in on this dirt road, and I saw, and this is really, really, really humbling and embarrassing even for me to admit and be vulnerable. But because of the only views I knew, I saw Buddha statues all over the grounds as I was pulling in. And I remember looking over in fear going, is that an idol? Is that what an idol is? Because of things that I was taught, and a fear, and, you know, something that I cultivated in my head, and my story of, you know, from Bible scripture text, what that meant to me. And then I go into the retreat center, and it's the most beautiful, non-judgmental space I've ever been in my entire life. I've never felt more welcome. The inclusiveness of being an individual without a label or a hat to wear, or there were no questions on what do you do for a living, or what is your spiritual practice, or it was welcoming and sharing food and sitting in circles and being in nature and going on walks. And it was something that started the shift in my life and ended me up even going to yoga teacher training for the 200 hour. So that was the start of my fear story. And at that time in my life, I was raising children. I was in my 20-year marriage before that ended. And I was using, I knew that fear and pride were things that I was really struggling with. You know, when you're doing all the hard stuff, the rearing of the kids and the working and trying to figure out, you know, how to share space and be in a marriage. And it was something that was hard for me, and I was afraid of failing. So I would look up in Bible scriptures. So this is one of my resources. So I would look up in the Bible scriptures. If you go to the back, I would look up the opposite of what I was feeling. So if I was afraid that this was going to happen, or I had fear that this is, you know, this story is showing up, I would look up trust, or I would look up faith, and really meditate. At that time, I didn't know I was meditating on those scriptures, but I would meditate on those scriptures and see if I could calm those thoughts that kind of really kept holding me in a place that didn't feel very good. And then recently, so I'm also in the middle of reading The Heart of Buddha's Teaching, Thich Nhat Hanh. So current day, I'm reading about the Noble Eightfold Path. And in the second part, so there's right view and right thinking, Thich Nhat Hanh goes on to describe right thinking and uses a contemplation question and asks, you know, when you're facing certain thought patterns, ask yourself, are you sure? So pausing and saying, are you sure? And then asking another question, maybe, where are you, or what are you doing, to kind of bring you to present moment. And then he uses a phrase to change the peg. This is maybe the fourth step in the right thinking chapter in this book. And change the peg meant, from the way I understood it, like if you had a peg and you put it in a pegboard and you took it from point A and you put it in point B, to use that analogy, that physical analogy, and try to mentally map and tangibly change the thought pattern. So how I took that was, if I had a fear thought, that I would flip it and turn it into something that was not a fear thought. You know, are you sure? Or what is the view? Or, you know, having the choice. So it's empowering me to have the choice to change the peg and focus on this thought, not that thought. Not that it's not real, or I'm not judging myself for having those thoughts. I guess I'm sharing these things because of the tools that are showing up for me in different spiritual practices and different philosophers, and it's the same beautiful advice that I'm receiving. And then, let's see, so in the yamas and niyamas, so in ahimsa, we learn non-violence and non-harming is a way to practice and a way to live. And in the beginning of the chapter of ahimsa, fear is recognized as violence. That's how this author recognizing it. And so, I tried to mentally map that, and fear, for instance, when I was trying to make sense of fear, I take this apple for a chance. This apple is simply just an apple. But maybe if somebody breaks into my house and I'm afraid, and I take this apple and I throw this apple at somebody, then fear, not that anybody would break in my house, but fear changes this apple into something else because I put a thought behind it. And that's where, to me, the thoughts become words, then the words become actions. And that concept of Thich Nhat Hanh, changing the peg, helps me nourish my thoughts. And then the last thing, resource I've used is A Course in Miracles. So A Course in Miracles is something that I'm currently studying. I'm on day 269. It's a daily reading practice. In the Course in Miracles, authors and teachers are teaching from a standpoint of thoughts are not real, fear is not real, that these are illusions. So as I am learning these things, I kind of want to share what these are, and maybe they're applicable, maybe they're not. I did print off an exercise on the bottom of the handout that I am hoping comes your way that has to do with the yamas and niyamas. In our 200-hour teacher training, for either some of us or most of us, Rhonda had mentioned that the yamas and niyamas were like the 10 commandments of yoga, and that sat with me in a way as a guide, and I thought that was a beautiful way to describe it. And the yamas and niyamas and 200-hour teacher training has changed my life and my perspective and how I relate to myself, my family, and other people in my life. Now, on the other side of the paper, I wrote down the 10 commandments. And my hope is that if you have interest, maybe you would join me or just take a minute or two and take the one side of the paper, the yamas and niyamas, and the 10 commandments, and look for, instead of them being separate entities, as we all travel through our life and our human experience and our spiritual practice with our open hearts and our open minds, may we see sameness. So may we see that maybe one of the 10 commandments, you take a line and you go, gosh, that kind of looks like maybe similar to this yama or this niyama. And as I drew the lines and what I thought looked like sameness in spiritual practice, instead of dividing us spiritually, it felt really, really nice to not feel afraid that my root structure of what I was raised with as a religious guideline, which led me into my spiritual practice. And now I've sat in a lot of spiritual circles, whether I was at silent retreat or I've visited a Buddhist temple, or I've gone to a service of some sort, or I get to learn from teachers who are practicing Taoism. I'm learning from so many things that I almost find myself a little bit, and I think I might have shared this with Mike, a little bit irritated that there's so much spiritual segregation in the communities that I'm part of and love so much. My hope, my small, that I would like to be big. There's a poet who references that. I can't come up with that poet's name right now. Letting our small be big. May I, or may we, see sameness in people that might look different or might have a different upbringing or a different spiritual practice, or they were brought up with different views than us. And may we see sameness instead of the fear of being different, or insecurities that could turn into thoughts that would create walls instead of open hearts that create open arms that can create hugs. So my contemplation question is fear real? Without judgment, with grace and compassion of all the times that I am afraid and I don't know what to do with some of those things sometime, and knowing that we get to learn together a lot of tools, because the opposite of fear to me is love. And the more love that we can give, the more compassion and the more grace, we get to practice philosophy and be teachers and ask contemplation questions like all the philosophers before. And as we're students, we're also teachers, and may we always be students with love. Thank you for your time.